Welcome to the New Life Stories channel. We hope you will have fun with us. Enjoy watching.
Catherine, my husband stopped at the table where I was working. Do you remember where my passport is? I was completely absorbed in my work, and with difficulty, I looked up from my laptop. Patrick was standing there looking at me questioningly. Your passport should be in the second locker of your desk, where all your papers are. Look in there. Yeah, thanks. My husband nodded and stepped back. I wanted to ask him why he needed a passport, but I had already forgotten about it and was immersed in my work again. If I had taken my mind off the laptop and talked to my husband, maybe things would have gone differently. I left on business, he called out after a few minutes, but I didn't even look up. For me, time was flying very fast, and I didn't have time for anything at all. I didn't have time for anything at all, not at work, where there were constant demands, and not at home, where Patrick often had to cook and clean. Even spending time with my husband was not always possible. This was probably the deciding factor for Patrick. That night, Patrick looked at me strangely, as if he wanted to say something. To be honest, I didn't pay much attention to it because I had numbers and graphs in my head. It was December, and I had to prepare various reports. I worked as a remote accountant for several organizations, so every day I had a schedule. I realized that it was too much and it was necessary to somehow reduce working hours and more often do something around the house, but I wanted to earn so much and buy a big house where our children would run and play. And I wanted to live and not need anything. In general, I tried my best to get on my feet and provide for the future. Except that I didn't take into account that I needed to work on our relationship in the present. I went to bed that night again after Patrick had long since settled down. He moved over a little as I lay down and put his arm around me. Pat, I'm tired. Let's not do this right now. I hugged my husband too, and almost immediately fell asleep when I heard his disappointed sigh. On New Year's Eve, I finally got my work sorted out and breathed a little easier. I didn't even realize when Patrick had put up the tree and decorated it. Or rather, I saw him fiddling around and pulling it out of the pantry, and even gave him a couple tips on how to hang the balls. But I didn't even think to get up and help him. Are we celebrating at home? I asked Patrick the morning of December 31st. You're a little late, my husband shook his head. It's New Year's Eve today, and you just thought about it. It's about time, I smiled at him. Catherine, let's... Patrick hesitated and didn't finish the sentence. Let's what? I didn't realize what he really wanted to say. Patrick shrugged and said, I suggest we celebrate at home tonight, with salads and champagne. What do you say? We could do that. I too wanted to just sit at home with him and take a break from everything. We went to the store, made salads together, and for the first time in a long time began to talk normally. Pat, who had been sad for some reason in the morning, was a little happier and smiled when we talked to him. I caught his pensive look every now and then though, as if he was trying to solve some difficult problem and couldn't. As the chimes struck, we exchanged gifts, and I remembered mine only a couple days before New Year's Eve. I happened to be walking by a clock store and remembered that Patrick had broken mine. They're beautiful, thank you, Catherine. Patrick tried them on and twirled them around. Guess what I bought you? A necklace? A ring? A bracelet? I tried to guess. Maybe a dress or some makeup. But Patrick smiled enigmatically and shook his head negatively at my every suggestion. Finally, he took pity and gave me a hint. Catherine, when we were first married, we wanted to go there. I frowned, remembering everything that had happened in the past 4 years. Back then we had been happy and had made far-reaching plans for our lives. Gradually, those plans were forgotten, and instead we were both immersed in work and other things. With great difficulty, but I was able to remember our dreams. We wanted to go to a ski resort, in Europe. Only it's expensive there, we probably won't be able to. Patrick smilingly pulled an envelope from under the pillow behind his back and held it out to me. Open it. Inside were 2 tickets, and I looked up at my husband with delight. Are you serious? We're really going to the resort? Yes, we are, Patrick kissed me. We're leaving on January 2nd, so you have time to pack. I jumped around the room with joy, and then I hugged Patrick tightly and we started kissing. This vacation was going great. I forgot about work and Patrick laughed at my jokes. We enjoyed each other and the vacation at one of the most famous resorts. But when we got home, things went back to the way they were. I started working all day, and Patrick got sad. It didn't last long. About a month after our vacation, Patrick sat down next to me, made me look away from my laptop and looked into my eyes and spoke. I filed for divorce. Charts, numbers, and everything else immediately flew out of my head. I stared at my husband stunned, unable to comprehend what he had just said. "Can you hear me?" Patrick raised his voice a little. I was in court before New Year's Eve. "I don't understand." My voice was weak. "What did you do?" Patrick took a little pity on me, pulled my computer chair closer to him. Then he looked me straight in the eye and repeated, "I filed for divorce. We'll be divorced in a month. I wanted to tell you about it later, but I couldn't hide it any longer." Why? For the first time, my mind was blank. We were doing so well. We love each other. Everything was good. Patrick interjected. "Are you kidding me?" "Yes, we spent New Year's Eve together, but the rest of the time." "When was the last time we were together besides the holiday? Walking, talking, making love? When was the last time you cooked something other than convenience foods? Or went out for a visit?" I listened to this accusatory speech and tears came to my eyes. I was trying to earn money for our house. I tried to say something in my defense. "Why? We wanted a child 2 years ago, but then you decided that you had to earn money first. I can't do this anymore. I need a wife, not a body behind a computer." I cried, and Patrick paced the room nervously. "I don't care about the money. You don't even know what I do or what I want to do. My mom invited us to visit, but you had a job. My sister got married, you wouldn't even go to their wedding with me. I don't want to be in a relationship where you don't want anything but work. Patrick, I need you." I tried to convince him. "I love you. Catherine, I love you too, but I need to be alone right now. We're a month away from divorce. If you want to change anything, you'll call me. You know my number." I didn't even have time to stop Patrick. He picked up the bag of things he had prepared while I wasn't looking. However, it turned out there were a lot of things I hadn't seen. The worst part was that Patrick turned out to be right. I hadn't been married to him lately, but to work. No wonder Patrick couldn't stand it and left. I remembered that my husband had tried to talk to me several times before about the job situation, but I had only brushed it off and said everything was just fine. My first inclination was to rush after my husband and bring him back, but I stopped myself with an effort of will, realizing that Patrick wasn't coming back just yet. First, I needed to prove to him that I had changed and loved him, which was the absolute truth. I'd just gotten too carried away and taken on too much work. "Yes, Catherine." I looked at my crying face in the mirror. "What are we going to do?" Of course, the reflection couldn't answer me, but I was confused. Walking around the room, I began to figure out what to do and make a plan, saying everything out loud so I wouldn't forget. First, I needed to quit 2 organizations. One for work would be enough. It doesn't matter if the income is reduced. Patrick is more important to me. I looked at the tree. We still hadn't put it up. I needed a distraction, so I started taking down the ornaments and putting them in a box. Second, I need to call Patrick's mom and sister and apologize to them. This is definitely where I messed up big time. You can't trade work for relationships with relatives. Patrick's sister Alice was a wonderful girl, and I felt ashamed that I had treated an important event in her life in such a way. And his mom Emma also did not interfere in our lives, but on the contrary helped. Third, I had to figure out how to make up with Patrick. I sobbed again, thinking how much I had hurt my husband. He'd been so caring and loving. I realized why he bought the tickets to the resort. Patrick thought I'd get away and not burden myself anymore. He was trying to make things work, but I was only good enough for a week's vacation. And then I forgot about him again. His pensive looks made sense now. Patrick was trying to decide what to do. Of course, it was a shame he'd filed for divorce, but I'd show him I loved him and we'd take back the application. It was simple in words, but at the stage of figuring these things out, I found it quite difficult. The next day, I set about executing the plan. At first, I did not want to let me go from the organizations, convinced that until April they could not fire me in any way. They said that this was the busiest season. I called one of the bosses for half a day, convincing him that I would not be able to work for them anymore. I understood, but I also knew that if I stayed until April, I would definitely lose Patrick, and he was much more important to me. "I'm sorry, I'm pregnant," I blurted out when I ran out of other arguments. "Do you want me to take maternity leave in your organization? Are you willing to pay me while I just stay at home?" The organizations didn't want that, and we quickly said goodbye. I thought about what I had said because if you think about it, it could very well have been true. With vacation, work, and Patrick leaving, I had forgotten about my cycle. I just now realized I was late. I should stop by the pharmacy tomorrow, I whispered. Now I had to call Patrick's mom and sister. I started with Emma, my mom. Good afternoon, this is Catherine. I began rather timidly. Catherine. My mother-in-law's voice was quite cheerful, and I realized that Patrick hadn't told his family anything. How are you doing? When are you coming to visit us? Everything is great, and I want to visit next month. I relaxed and smiled, thinking that I would be reconciled with Patrick by then. We chatted for a while, and then I started to end the call. Dealing with my mother-in-law had been easy, but the next conversation was much harder. Hi, Alice. I tried to make my voice friendly. How are you doing? I'm doing great, she said. Alice, I'm sorry. I decided to get to the purpose of the call. I don't understand how it happened that I missed your wedding. I got busy and couldn't go with Patrick. Yeah, Patrick said you've been working a lot, so much so that you didn't even come with him, and you were supposed to be my girlfriend. Alice sighed heavily, but then softened. Okay, since you couldn't be at the wedding, you just have to come to visit. It's my birthday in 2 months, so you and Patrick are invited. I'll be there. I smiled happily. Tell me, what should I get you? I don't know yet. Alice laughed, or rather the list is too big. I'll write to you later. Okay, I'll be waiting, I promised. We talked for a couple more minutes, and then said goodbye, satisfied with each other. I glanced at my watch. It was getting pretty late, and it was dark outside. It was the second night without Patrick, but yesterday had been much worse. I'd cried and didn't know what to do. Now there was a confidence in my heart that everything was going to be okay. I ran to the drugstore this morning and stocked up on pregnancy tests. By my calculations, I was already in my 2nd month, just since New Year's Eve. I had to wait about 5 minutes for an accurate reading. All this time I nervously paced around the apartment and thought about how our lives would change if it was true. I also imagined how happy Patrick would be, because he had wanted a baby for so long. I was the one who'd been putting it off. 2 stripes, happy tears ran down my cheeks. A month ago I would have been upset about this result, but now I was happy. Suddenly my values were different, and I realized that I wanted a family, not a 24-hour job. Now all that was left was to tell Patrick and get the statement from the court. I picked up my phone and dialed his number. Hi, Patrick answered almost immediately. How's it going? Are you okay? His voice was caring, and I cursed at myself again for appreciating him so little. I'm fine, Patrick. My voice changed too, becoming warmer and more gentle. We need to see each other. Why? Don't tell me you've already come to your senses. I love you and I don't want to lose you. Tears rang in my voice. I left 2 organizations and now my job only takes 3 or 4 hours a day. I'm sorry I got so carried away. That's good to hear, Patrick said thoughtfully. I have more news for you. I hesitated to say anything about the test. When I see you, I'll tell you. Okay, Patrick was intrigued. Come home tomorrow. Why don't we go to a restaurant? It'll be like a date. I pictured myself sitting at a table in a pretty dress, handing Patrick a pregnancy test, and I grinned. Let's go on a date some other time. I need to talk to you alone. Okay, see you tomorrow, Patrick said goodbye, not even realizing the surprise. The next day I cleaned the house, prepared a candlelit dinner, put on a beautiful dress, and waited for my husband. He didn't stay long though, and soon he was already standing in the hallway. Come into the hall, I pulled him by the hand. We sat down at the table in the hall, opposite each other, and both of us were silent. Catherine, what's the surprise? Patrick looked at me questioningly. Would you like some wine? I handed him the bottle instead of answering. Patrick poured some for himself and me, but I shook my head. I won't, I only bought the wine for you. Why wouldn't you? I left the room for the bathroom and came back a minute later. Patrick was looking at me, both interested and wary at the same time, as if he thought I was up to something. Here, I'm afraid that's the reason I won't be able to drink for at least a couple years. Patrick stared at the test for a few seconds, then looked at me and asked quietly, Are you pregnant? Really? It's the 2nd month, I smiled happily. The vacation had really done us some good. Patrick was silent for about a minute, and I sat down next to him on the couch. Patrick, I'm sorry for everything. I'll be a good wife and mother. Don't walk away from me again. My husband looked at me and confessed. I took the statement from the court when I left you. I realized I couldn't live alone. We sat there smiling happily at each other. I promised myself that I would never let Patrick leave again. I loved him too much, and he loved me.